Today I'm going to tell you guys when you should be shooting in manual versus when you should be shooting in aperture or shutter priority. So first I'm going to put out an opinion here that shutter priority is almost always useless to me. Not to everyone, I'm sure, but I don't really see the point. If I need a specific type of shutter, usually like a fast shutter because I'm not needing long exposures usually, I just open up my aperture in aperture priority, which causes the camera to pick a fast shutter. So I don't find shutter priority too useful, but I want to talk about specifically when to use aperture priority versus manual. Now, a lot of this will be preference. I like shooting in manual because I like controlling my camera. I've done this so long that it's second nature. It's kind of like my manual cars. I don't think about how I'm shifting. I'm just doing it intuitively at this point, and I enjoy that process. Not everyone does, and I don't expect everyone to enjoy it. So a lot of it is habit, but what are the actual objective benefits to shooting in manual? The first one would be consistency. When you're shooting an aperture priority, of course, how you're metering, like evaluative or spot metering, that kind of thing, will affect your exposure. But when you're shooting an aperture priority, your camera from one shot to another might choose a different shutter and it could change your exposure. That may be a good thing if the light changed, but often your light isn't changing, your subject matter isn't changing, but maybe your composition differed a tiny bit, and so the camera decided to choose a different shutter. When I'm editing in Lightroom, that means I now have to edit those files differently. It means I have to get them to the same exposure before I can start, or will choose to start doing global changes to the whole images, like sharpening, etc. I have to make that adjustment first, and I don't like editing. Some photographers enjoy editing. For me, it's the least enjoyable part. I like shooting, I like creating, and the editing process for me is not really creative. So I try to avoid that. That's one reason I shoot manual: consistency. And it's a good one, honestly. If you're able to control everything on the fly, if you get good at it, it's a rewarding experience. Not only it keeps you connected with shooting, but then you have more control over how your images are turning out in post, etc. However, you might not care about that. You might not care about editing, and so maybe a tiny third of a stop difference image to image is not a big deal to you, and it's not worth fidgeting around with manual. I get that. So let's talk about, for someone like me, if you are like me and you like shooting manual, sometimes there is a reason to shoot an aperture priority, and what would that be? I think the best time to shoot aperture priority is when you have more than 2 stops difference in light from one shot to another. And what that means is I've gotten really good at intuitively just adjusting my settings when shooting manual. I walk into a room and I typically know what my settings need to be at, and I start dialing it all automatic. I'm not thinking about it at this point. Sometimes when I go from one shot to another, there may be more than 3 stops of light difference. In that situation, if I'm shooting in manual, 3 stops of light means 9 clicks on my shutter in order to compensate. And I need to see a moment here, grab it, and by the time I'm able to move over and shoot this way, I need my settings in place or I'm going to miss the shot because I'm working that fast. If that's the situation, I will switch to aperture priority. Of course, you have one more alternative, and that would be using your C1, C2, C3. You can save on your Canon cameras, and I'm pretty sure most cameras, most pro cameras, you can save settings to a specific position on the dial. If my lighting situation is going to remain one way here and one way there, I will switch on the dial between the two. And that way I'm now still shooting in manual, but I can go back to that manual setting from here to there just with the switch of the dial. So I hope this helps you guys figure out your own settings. A lot of this will come down to preference, but there is a good reason to shoot an aperture priority even for manual shooters. And there's a good reason to shoot in manual even if you prefer aperture priority. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video.